Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're getting into a really tough story. One of the most frustrating sagas in modern medicine, really. We're talking about the decades-long, and I mean decades-long, search for a cure for Alzheimer's. And it's a wild ride. A story about one powerful idea, billions and billions of dollars, and a massive scandal that's making scientists wonder if they've been on the wrong track this whole time. So let's kick things off with a number. $42 billion. That's a rough estimate of how much has been poured into Alzheimer's clinical trials between 1995 and 2021. And for all that money, all that effort, the results have been, well, just devastatingly poor. We're talking a near total failure rate at finding a cure. So you gotta ask, what on earth went wrong? How did we end up here? Well, to figure that out, we have to rewind and look at the one single theory that absolutely dominated the entire field. It grabbed hold of researchers, it opened up the wallets of funding agencies, and it shaped an entire generation of science. And that theory is called the amyloid hypothesis. It popped up back in the early 90s, and honestly, it was beautifully simple. The idea was this. You've got these sticky plaques made of a protein called amyloid-beta that build up in the brain. These plaques, they're the bad guys. They're the villains. They kill brain cells, and that's what causes Alzheimer's. So the thinking was, okay, if the plaques are the problem, then the solution is simple, right? Get rid of the plaques, cure the disease. Easy. And for years, that wasn't just a theory, it was the theory. It was the central dogma of Alzheimer's research. But then 2022 happened. A bombshell report drops in the journal Science, and it suggests that one of the most critical pieces of evidence holding this entire idea up might have been built on a lie. A deliberate fraud. Okay, so the story goes back to this groundbreaking paper from 2006, published in Nature. At the time, it felt like the smoking gun, the proof everyone had been waiting for. But fast forward 16 years, and this investigation comes out, alleging that the key images in that paper were manipulated, faked. And just like that, a cloud of doubt was cast over more than a decade of research that was inspired by that single study. So what exactly did this paper claim that was so revolutionary? Well, it wasn't just about those big plaques we've been talking about. No, these researchers said they found something new, a specific, tiny, free-floating clump of amyloid they called A-beta star 56. And here's the kicker. They claimed that when they injected just this one thing into young, healthy rats, bam! The rats got memory problems, like right away. I mean, this was a blockbuster finding. It seemed like absolute proof that this specific little amyloid clump was the real killer, and boy did it open the floodgates for funding. Billions of dollars were suddenly aimed right at this target. I mean, you can imagine the shockwaves this sent through the community. The allegations were just devastating. We're not just talking about one bad paper. This wasn't just one study. This threatened to pull the rug out from under the entire field. It raised the terrifying possibility that years of work and all those billions of dollars had been spent chasing a ghost. And here's where it gets even messier. This scandal didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire that had been smoldering for years. This accusation that Alzheimer's research wasn't a free market of ideas. Instead, the story went, it was controlled by a small, powerful group of insiders who were dead set on their one pet theory. Yeah, some critics even gave them a name, the amyloid mafia or the amyloid cabal. And the allegation, laid out by investigative journalists like Charles Piller, was pretty serious. They said this tight-knit group of scientists basically ran the show. They controlled the big funding committees, they were the gatekeepers of the top journals, and they created this echo chamber where the amyloid hypothesis was the only song you were allowed to sing. If you were a researcher with a different idea, good luck. They said it was basically career suicide to question the dogma. So that begs the question, right? If amyloid isn't the whole story, what were these other ideas? What were the theories that got pushed to the sidelines for so many years? Well, let's look at a few of the other suspects. Okay, so it turns out there were some really compelling ideas floating around. You got the infection hypothesis, which basically says maybe Alzheimer's is triggered by germs, like the herpes virus or even the bacteria from gum disease getting into the brain and causing this whole defensive mess. Then there's the metabolic hypothesis, which is fascinating. It frames Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, the idea that the brain stops responding to insulin and its cells literally start to starve. And another big one is the lysosomal dysfunction idea. Think of it like a garbage strike inside your brain cells. The system that's supposed to clean out toxic junk just stops working, and all the skunk, including amyloid and another protein called tau, just piles up. So you've got all these drug trials failing one after another, And then you have this massive fraud scandal. That 1-2 punch is finally starting to force a real change. It feels like the dam that was holding back all other research is finally starting to crack. And hey, you can see this shift happening in real time if you just follow the money. Back in 2013, something like 36% of all Alzheimer's trials funded by the NIH were going after amyloid. But by 2023, that number had totally plummeted down to 15%. The money is starting to flow to other ideas, to inflammation, to metabolism, to all these other avenues that were ignored for so long. But of course, it's never that simple, is it? Just as it seemed like the entire field was ready to give up on amyloid for good, a new batch of drugs came along and did something unexpected. They started to work. Not a home run, not a cure, but they showed a small yet statistically significant benefit. So you have these new drugs, lecanemab and donanemab, and they've shown they can slow down the rate of cognitive decline by about 27 to 37% for people in the early stages of the disease. Now, let me be super clear, this is not a cure, not even close, but it's huge because it's the first real proof that targeting amyloid can actually do something. But, and this is a big but, these drugs come with a pretty serious risk. Yeah, that major side effect is called ARIA, and it's scary stuff. It stands for amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, which is a fancy way of saying swelling or even small bleeds in the brain. It's common enough that if you're on one of these drugs, you need frequent, expensive MRI scans to make sure your brain is okay. It just adds a whole other layer of difficulty and cost to the treatment. So, where does all this leave us? Well, that simple, clean story of amyloid is the villain is pretty much gone for good. And what's taking its place is something a lot messier, a lot more complex, but also, frankly, a lot more realistic. Basically, we're shifting away from that old straight-line thinking. The new view is that Alzheimer's is not a one thing causes another kind of disease. It seems like amyloid buildup is a really important early step. It might be the spark that starts the fire, but it's not the whole fire. It's not enough, all by itself, to cause the devastation of dementia. And this leads us to what you might call an integrated model. The thinking now is that maybe something like a low-grade infection or that cellular garbage strike we talked about kicks off the amyloid buildup. But the real damage, the thing that really sends the brain into a downward spiral, is the brain's response to the amyloid. It's the chronic inflammation, the insulin resistance, all these other systems going haywire. It all feeds on itself in this destructive, vicious loop. So the path forward, while not easy, is becoming a lot clearer. First, we have to keep funding all those different avenues of research, not just amyloid. The future probably isn't a single magic bullet. It's more likely going to be a cocktail of drugs, something to hit the amyloid, something to calm the inflammation, something to fix the metabolic problems. And maybe most importantly, this whole scandal has been a wake-up call. The scientific community has to have higher standards for integrity, for checking each other's work, and for actually encouraging people to challenge the big, popular ideas. You know, when you look back, the whole story of the amyloid hypothesis is a powerful and pretty humbling cautionary tale. It shows how a really compelling idea can harden into dogma and potentially sideline good science for decades. But the good news is, it also shows that science, even when it takes a massive long turn, can eventually correct itself. The road ahead is definitely more complicated now, but for the millions and millions of people whose lives are touched by this disease, it's also, finally, a little more hopeful.